Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the heart of what makes or breaks startups, right? Product market fit.
Yeah, exactly. But we're going a bit deeper than just, do they have it or not?
Right. We're looking at this really interesting framework. It sort of breaks down the how of product market fit.
hmm It outlines three, let's call them archetypes, ways a product connects with the market based on how customers see the problem.
Yeah, and it's super useful, I think, for anyone curious about business, about innovation. It's a different lens.
Definitely. So the three we'll be digging into are hair on fire, hard fact, and future vision.
Each one's got its own vibe, its own challenges, its own priorities. Really fascinating stuff. So, where do we start? Hair on fire.
Sounds good. So
Yeah.
hair on fire, this is probably the most, well, intuitive one.
Okay.
It's where the customer's need is just incredibly pressing. It's urgent. It's obvious. They know they have a problem.
Like their hair is literally on fire. They need water now. No convincing needed.
Exactly. The demand is pretty much baked in. People are feeling serious pain, and they're actively looking for relief.
Okay, but if the problem is that obvious, I'm guessing you're not the only one who sees it.
That's the catch. Yeah. Hair on fire markets are almost always crowded. Lots of competition jumping in.
So how do you win then? Just be faster, cheaper.
Well, the thinking here is that faster or cheaper usually isn't enough. Not for long-term success, anyway.
Okay.
You really need to deliver something that's genuinely best in class. And that means real differentiation.
More than just incremental improvements.
Right. It often comes down to a significantly better customer experience, something that really sets you apart and is hard to copy.
Okay, so a defensible edge built on experience. We've got a couple of examples here. First up, Wiz, cloud security.
Yep, cloud infrastructure security, definitely a hot space, super crowded, a classic hair on fire situation.
So what was their angle? What made them different?
Well, they saw a big friction point with existing solutions. Most relied on software agents.
Agents, meaning you have to install something on every server or instance.
Exactly. Which can be, a real pain. Complex to manage, can slow things down, maybe leaves gaps.
Okay, I can see that being annoying. So Wiz.
Wiz came in with an agentless approach. Totally different.
Agentless, how did that work?
They figured out a way to scan cloud environments without needing to install anything inside them, which meant they could identify vulnerabilities incredibly quickly.
Ah, so that's the better experience piece. Much faster time to value.
Hugely faster.
Mhm.
Apparently, their demos were just 15 minutes long and
Yeah.
could show customers serious issues right away.
Mm.
That's compelling.
Wow, yeah. 15 minutes versus potentially weeks of deployment.
Yeah.
And they grew fast.
Insanely fast. They combined that tech advantage with just relentless execution.
Mhm.
The founders were basically the first salespeople. The engineering team was iterating nonstop.
That founder-led sales thing often happens early on.
And the results were, well, pretty stunning. $0 to $2.8 million in revenue in one quarter, then hitting a $100 million AR in about 18 months.
It's just incredible growth. Okay, second example, Rippling, HR software.
Yeah, another massive market. Everyone needs HR software, right?
Yeah.
So again, very competitive, hair on fire.
And the founder, Parker Conrad, he'd already built Zenefits in this space, so he knew it inside out.
Exactly, which probably helped him spot the next big problem or limitation maybe.
Which was?
The fact that employee data was usually all over the place. Different systems for payroll, for benefits, for IT device management.
Oh, silos. Always the silos.
For Rippling's core idea, their big differentiation, was a single unified database for all employee info, the system of record.
Okay, so one central place for everything about an employee.
Yep. And the magic or the insight was that once you have that, features can just ripple across the system.
Ah, hence the name.
You got it. Change an address, it updates payroll, benefits, maybe their software access, all automatically.
That sounds way better. For HR, for finance, for IT, less duplication, fewer errors.
Exactly. A fundamentally different and superior experience. And that allowed them to carve out space, grow rapidly, and even charge more because they bundled all this value together.
So the big takeaway for Hair on Fire seems to be, yes, speed matters, but you need that breakthrough differentiation, something that creates a noticeably better customer experience to cut through all that noise.
Couldn't have said it better. It's about a real leap, not just a small step.
Okay, cool. Let's shift gears then. Archetype number 2, hard fact. This sounds different, maybe harder.
It presents a very different kind of challenge, yeah. Hard fact isn't about an obvious burning need.
Okay.
It's about convincing people to rethink something they currently just accept as
Yeah.
Well, a fact of life.
Yeah.
A limitation they think is unchangeable, or a process they just do without questioning.
Ah, okay. So the market isn't actively looking for a solution because they don't even see the problem in the same way, or they think that's just how it is.
Precisely. So your first job is often education. You have to teach the market that the hard fact they accept.
Hmm.
It doesn't have to be true.
That sounds like a heavy lift. Educating an entire market.
It can be. But the flip side is you probably face less direct competition, at least initially, because it's not an obvious problem to solve.
Right. People aren't rushing to fix something they don't perceive as broken.
Success here really hangs on having a genuinely novel approach. And the problem you're tackling has to be significant enough that people are willing to change deeply ingrained habits or beliefs once you show them the light.
Okay, let's look at the examples. First one, Block, which we used to know as Square.
Right. And the hard fact they took on.
Cash only.
Exactly. Especially for small businesses, craft fairs, food trucks, whatever. It was just assumed that many places simply couldn't take cards easily.
Yeah, you just accepted you needed cash sometimes. It created friction, lost sales probably, but it was just normal.
Until Square came along. Their insight was seeing that smartphones, which were becoming everywhere, could be the key.
Right, they could turn that phone in your pocket into a credit card reader.
Yep. Using that little white dongle initially,
Mm.
it directly challenged the idea that you needed bulky, expensive, traditional terminals to accept cards.
So they weren't just offering another payment system, they were saying, that limitation you live with, it's gone.
Pretty much.
Mm.
But getting people to trust it, both the sellers and the buyers, that was key.
How'd they do that?
A big part of their early strategy was giving the hardware away for free, and the software. Lowered the barrier to entry massively.
Smart. Get it into people's hands.
Yeah, it encouraged adoption, created buzz, turned early users into evangelists. They effectively had to convince the world they didn't have to live with cash only, and it worked. They set a new standard.
Okay, great example. Second hard fact case. HubSpot. What was the fact they challenged?
Think back to, say, 2006. How did most businesses do marketing, especially small businesses?
Ads, buying lists, maybe direct mail, cold calling, stuff that costs money, basically.
Right, mostly outbound, often expensive channels. And that put smaller companies at a real disadvantage. That was the accepted reality, the hard fact.
Okay. And HubSpot's realization.
They saw that the internet was changing the game. Things like blogs, social media, getting found on Google, SEO, email. These were tools smaller companies could use to reach audiences effectively, often at a much lower cost.
The power of content.
Exactly. So they built a suite of tools to help businesses do just that. Manage content, SEO, email, leads.
But just having the tools wasn't enough, was it? They had to convince people this different way of marketing was actually better.
That was the crucial step. They didn't just sell software. They sold an idea. They actually coined the term inbound marketing.
Right. Inbound versus outbound.
Yep. And they wrote a book about it, created tons of content, basically educated the entire market. Their message was, the old way is broken, especially for you. Here's a new, better way.
So they established the philosophy first, then offered the tools to execute it.
Precisely. They positioned themselves as thought leaders, defined the category, and made that old hard fact about expensive marketing seem, well, outdated.
So the core of the hard fact path is spotting that accepted limitation, that unquestioned way of doing things, and then proving there's a compellingly better, often very different alternative. And education is absolutely key.
You're selling a new perspective just as much as you're selling a product.
Okay, fascinating. Let's move to the final archetype then. Future vision. This one sounds ambitious, maybe a bit sci-fi.
It definitely can feel that way. Future vision is about creating a whole new reality, often through technology or ideas that seem way out there.
So unlike Hair on Fire, people aren't screaming for a solution.
Right. They might not even realize a problem exists that could be solved. Or they might think the solution you're proposing is just impossible, pure science fiction.
And unlike Hard Fact, where you're changing how people do something now, here you're maybe promising something entirely new that doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. The biggest hurdle here, typically, is customer disbelief. People just don't believe it's possible, or necessary, or maybe even desirable.
So how on earth do you get something like that off the ground? Belief seems like a tough thing to sell.
It is. You have to somehow cultivate that belief in this new paradigm. And crucially, because these visions often take a long time to realize.
Years. Decades.
Potentially, you absolutely need to find what the framework calls pit stops. along the way.
Pit stops, like intermediate steps.
Yeah, commercially viable applications of your technology or idea that can actually generate revenue, get you customers, prove something works, and basically fund the longer journey. Survival is key.
Okay, that makes sense. You need fuel for the rocket ship. Example one, NVIDIA. Huge company now, but their start.
Their initial vision back in the early 90s was pretty radical.
Yeah.
Dedicated 3D graphics chips to revolutionize PCs.
Which back then, most people probably thought, why do I need that? PCs were mostly for work, text.
Exactly, it was ahead of its time. They apparently struggled for like the first 6 years through multiple product iterations. The broad market just didn't get it yet.
So what was their pit stop? What finally clicked?
Video games.
Ah,
Yeah.
the killer app.
The killer app. Suddenly there was this application 3D gaming that absolutely demanded the kind of power their GPUs offered. It was irresistible to a growing market segment.
So gaming wasn't their entire original vision, maybe, but it was a market that desperately needed what they had.
Precisely. It gave them traction, revenue, credibility. It allowed them to become profitable, go public, and keep investing in the technology without that gaming pit stop.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Might have run out of road.
Very possibly. And now look, 30 years later, that core tech they developed is powering the AI revolution. Their original broader vision is kind of being realized now, but it took that gaming phase to get there.
Incredible long game. Okay, second future vision example. OpenAI. Their mission is, well, pretty big.
Yeah, achieving artificial general intelligence, AGI, for the benefit of humanity. Doesn't get much more future vision than that.
Still feels very much like the future. Even now, how did they start?
Initially, they were set up as a nonprofit research lab, pure research focus. But training these massive AI models, especially large language models, requires unbelievable amounts of computing power, which costs a fortune.
More than nonprofit donations could cover.
Way more. So they hit a point where the original structure wasn't sustainable for the scale of their ambition.
So their pit stop involved changing structure.
They transitioned to a capped profit structure.
Yeah.
This allowed them to take in massive investment, like from Microsoft.
But investment comes with expectations, right?
Yeah.
Like shipping products.
Exactly. And that pressure, combined with their research, led to, well, ChatGPT.
Which was unexpected in terms of its impact.
The sheer speed and scale of adoption seemed to surprise everyone, maybe even them. It showed this massive, latent consumer demand for generative AI that maybe wasn't obvious before.
So ChatGPT wasn't necessarily the original end goal of AGI.
No, it's seen more as a step towards AGI, but it became this incredibly successful product, a hugely important pit stop that validates the tech, generates revenue and data, and fuels the ongoing research towards that ultimate future vision.
Wow. So for future vision, it's about incredible persistence, holding on to that huge, maybe unbelievable goal, attracting talent who believe.
And being agile enough, maybe lucky enough, to find those intermediate commercial applications. Those pit stops are absolutely vital to survive the long haul.
Right. Got to keep the lights on while you're inventing the future.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, so we've covered hair on fire, hard fact, future vision, bringing it all together. What's the main point? Is one path better than others?
Not really, no. The framework doesn't say one is best. The key takeaway is that success isn't about the path itself, but about understanding which path you're on.
Understanding that relationship between the customer and the problem.
Exactly. And then aligning everything, your product, your strategy, your messaging, with that specific dynamic. Are you solving an urgent need, challenging a fixed belief, or building a new future?
It really makes you look at companies differently. The discussion mentions Apple as a company that's kind of surfed these waves over time.
Oh, totally. Apple's a great example. You could argue the original Macintosh, maybe even the Apple II, were future vision back then.
Right. Personal computing was still a wild idea for many.
Then maybe the iMac, making computers friendly and accessible, tackled a hard fact about computers being beige and intimidating.
And the iPhone.
Quintessential future vision at launch. It created a whole new category. But now, the mature smartphone market, that feels very hair on fire, right? Intense competition, focus on differentiation and experience.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe now with something like the Vision Pro.
Exactly. They might be cycling back into future vision, trying to define the next computing paradigm, potentially using tech honed during the iPhone's hair on fire phase.
It shows how dynamic this is. Companies can move between these archetypes or have different products in different phases.
Yeah, the really legendary companies often manage multiple product lines that go through these cycles.
Yeah.
It's not a static thing. Achieving product market fit isn't a destination you reach and then you're done.
It's an ongoing process. You have to keep finding it, keep adapting.
Absolutely. Markets change, competitors emerge, technology evolves. You have to stay tuned in.
This has been really insightful, a great way to think about innovation. So for you listening, maybe take a moment to reflect on these archetypes.
Yeah, think about companies you follow, or maybe even ideas you have. Which path do they seem to be on?
And here's a final thought, maybe. Is there something in your own work or your life that everyone just accepts as a hard fact? Some limitation or annoying process that just is?
Mm-hmm. Could it be overturned with a new approach? Or maybe you see glimpses of an emerging technology, something that feels like future vision that others are dismissing right now.
Yeah, this framework isn't just for VCs or startup founders. It's really a lens for seeing potential, for seeing how change happens all around us.
Well said. It's about spotting those opportunities hidden in plain sight or just over the horizon.